The helicopter wasn't supposed to crash. One moment, Arya Malhotra, CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, was reviewing quarterly projections on her tablet. The next, the world tilted violently. The blades shrieked, the pilot shouted something she couldn't hear, and the endless blue ocean rose up to swallow them whole. When Arya opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was fire licking at twisted metal. The second was a pair of desperate hands dragging her across wet sand. "Ma'am. Stay with me. Please." It was Daniel Reyes. A junior logistics coordinator. A single father. An employee she had barely spoken to before this trip. And just like that, the boss lady and her employee were stranded on a remote island, with no signal, no supplies, and no guarantee of rescue. Arya coughed up seawater and pushed herself up on trembling arms. The helicopter wreckage smoldered 50 yards down the shore. The pilot was nowhere in sight. Daniel stood a few feet away, his shirt torn, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. He looked terrified, but determined. "We need to move before that explodes," he said. Arya, who was used to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, nodded silently. Within minutes, the wreckage erupted into flames. They watched their last connection to civilization burn into black smoke. That was day one. By sunset, reality began to sink in. Arya's world had always been built on control. Schedules. Teams. Resources. She thrived on strategy and authority. But here? None of that mattered. Daniel, however, seemed different. He scavenged what he could from the wreckage before the flames consumed everything. A small emergency kit. 2 bottles of water. A half-burnt tarp. A first aid pouch. "We'll ration this," he said calmly. Arya noticed his hands shaking as he worked. "You've done this before?" she asked. He gave a weak laugh. "No, ma'am. But I've had practice surviving." She didn't understand what he meant, yet. The first night was brutal. They took shelter beneath palm trees, using the tarp to block the wind. The sounds of the island were alive, waves crashing, insects buzzing, distant rustling in the trees. Arya couldn't sleep. "I should have postponed this inspection," she murmured into the darkness. This trip was unnecessary. Daniel stared at the stars. "My daughter begged me not to come." Arya turned toward him. "She's 6, he continued softly. "Her mom passed away 2 years ago. It's just me and her now." Something tightened in Arya's chest. "What's her name?" "Sophia." He said it like it was the most precious word in the world. For the first time since the crash, Arya didn't feel like the most important person on the island. Day 2 brought hunger. Their water was limited. The sun was merciless. Arya's designer heels were useless in the sand, she tossed them aside and walked barefoot, wincing at every step. Daniel fashioned a crude spear from driftwood and attempted to catch fish in the shallow water. He failed. Again. And again. Frustration boiled over. "I'm sorry," he muttered after his 4th attempt. "I'm not very good at this." Arya surprised herself by stepping into the water beside him. "Teach me," she said. He blinked. "You want to try?" "I didn't build a company from nothing by giving up after 4 failures." That was the first time he saw the fire in her, not the intimidating CEO, but the fighter beneath. Together, soaked and exhausted, they finally caught a small fish. It wasn't much. But it was hope. By day 4, their conversations grew deeper. Without emails, meetings, and hierarchy, they were just 2 humans trying to survive. Arya learned that Daniel worked 2 jobs before she promoted him to logistics coordinator. That he often stayed late not for overtime, but because it meant free office air conditioning before returning to his tiny apartment. That he sometimes skipped meals so Sophia wouldn't have to. You never mentioned any of this, Arya said quietly. Daniel shrugged. Didn't want special treatment. She looked at the sand between her fingers. All those quarterly meetings about cost efficiency. All those decisions about cutting staff benefits to boost profit margins. For the first time, she wondered who had paid the real price. Day 6 nearly broke them. A storm rolled in without warning. The sky turned violent gray. Winds howled like something alive. Rain lashed against their fragile shelter, tearing it apart. They clung to each other as waves surged dangerously close. I can't die here, Daniel shouted over the storm. My daughter needs me. Arya had faced hostile takeovers, media scandals, ruthless competitors. But she had never faced death. And in that terrifying moment, titles meant nothing. You're not dying, she yelled back. We're getting out of here. For Sophia. Lightning split the sky. Their shelter collapsed completely. They spent the night pressed against a rocky cliff for protection, soaked, freezing, shaking. Arya whispered something she hadn't said in years. I'm scared. Daniel didn't hesitate. Me too. And somehow, admitting it made them stronger. Day 8 brought tension. They were weak. Dehydrated. Rescues still hadn't come. Arya blamed herself. They'll assume the crash was fatal. They'll stop searching. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we make ourselves impossible to ignore. He spent hours arranging large stones on the beach to spell SOS. Arya used fragments of metal from the wreckage to reflect sunlight toward the horizon. When Daniel collapsed from exhaustion, Arya dragged him into the shade. Don't you dare give up on me, she said fiercely. He managed a faint smile. Bossing me around even here, huh? She almost laughed. Almost. On the night of day 9, Daniel opened up about something he'd never told anyone at work. Sometimes I feel like I'm failing her, he admitted. I can't give her the life other kids have. Arya looked at him under the starlight. You're fighting to stay alive for her, she said. That's not failure. That's love. He swallowed hard. And you? He asked gently. What are you fighting for? The question stunned her. Her entire identity had been built around success. Growth. Recognition. But stripped of power and status, what remained? She thought about her estranged parents. The friends she hadn't called in years. The employees she barely knew beyond performance metrics. I think, she said slowly, I've been building an empire, and forgetting to build a life. Silence settled between them, not heavy, but honest. Day 10 began with a distant sound. A faint hum. Daniel's head shot up. Do you hear that? Arya held her breath. The sound grew louder. A rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon. They ran, stumbling, shouting, waving metal scraps that caught the sunlight. The helicopter circled once. Then twice. And finally dipped lower. Arya felt her knees buckle as tears streamed down her face. They were going home. Back in civilization, everything felt surreal. News channels called it a miracle. Shareholders called it a tragedy narrowly avoided. But Arya called an emergency board meeting for a different reason. Weeks later, Daniel sat nervously in the conference room, the same room where he once felt invisible. Arya stood at the head of the table. Our survival, she began, wasn't about titles. It wasn't about authority. It was about resilience, courage, and humanity. She announced sweeping changes, expanded employee healthcare, increased parental leave, hardship funds for single parents, flexible schedules. The board protested. She didn't back down. For 10 days, she said firmly, I survived because of someone this company would have overlooked. We succeed when our people do. The motion passed. Daniel couldn't speak. Later, outside the building, Sophia ran into her father's arms. Arya watched from a distance. Sophia looked up at her with wide eyes. Are you Daddy's boss? Arya smiled softly. I work with him. Sophia thought about that seriously, then nodded. He's a hero. Arya felt tears sting her eyes again. Yes, she whispered. He is. Months later, Arya stood on a different kind of stage, launching a new foundation dedicated to employee welfare and community support. But this time, she wasn't alone. Daniel stood beside her. Not as her subordinate, but as her partner in purpose. The island had taken away her comfort, her control, her certainty. In return, it gave her clarity. Success means nothing if you lose your humanity. Leadership isn't about standing above others, it's about standing with them. And sometimes, it takes being lost in the middle of nowhere, to finally find what truly matters.